He stood in court with evidence no one expected. Seconds later, the FBI walked in and changed everything. This is not just a story, it is the moment when the truth broke through the system. Post in the comments where are you watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest stories. Tom Homan stepped off the bus into the cold, gray morning with a measured gait that betrayed nothing of the turbulent storm raging inside him. A former ICE director, Homan had witnessed firsthand the corruption, abuse of power, and bureaucratic indifference that had gradually eroded the very fabric of justice in America. Disillusioned by the system he once served, he now wore his battle scars with quiet resolve. Today, he was headed to what appeared to be a routine court hearing, a procedural matter that most in the hallowed halls of the judiciary expected to pass without incident. But Tom had a hidden agenda, one that would soon shake the foundations of the courtroom and set in motion a chain of events with implications far beyond that somber room. The courthouse itself was a formidable edifice, a grand building of stone and marble, its lofty pillars and echoing corridors a testament to decades of legal tradition and authority. Lawyers in sharp suits and judges in solemn robes moved with practiced precision through long hallways, while the air filled with a heavy mixture of respect, fear, and the unspoken admittance of power. On this particular morning, the atmosphere was unusually tense. There was a palpable undercurrent of anticipation among the gathered crowd. Even before Tom Homan entered the chamber, whispers passed among the staff and observers that today something was not quite right. Inside the courtroom, the stage was set for another seemingly routine session. At the center of it all sat Judge James Boasberg, a man whose reputation for delivering stern verdicts was matched only by the rumors of his unaccountable conduct. Known for his unyielding judgments in cases that involved national security concerns, Boasberg had long been a controversial figure. His decisions, often described as arbitrary by those who analyzed them, frequently bore the unmistakable marks of bias and impropriety. Today, he appeared as confident and imperious as ever, a self-assured smile playing on his lips as he prepared to preside over the day's hearings. Tom Homan, whose face was lined with years of witnessing the darker rays of institutional power, took his seat among the observers. Clutched tightly in his hand was a plain, nondescript folder. A folder that contained documentary evidence so explosive it could unravel the carefully constructed facade of Judge Boasberg's career. Homan's eyes, steely and vigilant, scanned the room as he noted the subdued murmurs and furtive glances exchanged among the clerks and lawyers. He sensed that beneath the calm surface of legality lay a mesh of corruption and collusion, and he knew that today was his moment to expose it. As the hearing commenced, the proceedings were methodical, almost ritualistic, guided by a cadence of well-rehearsed legal formality. Yet, there was an unmistakable tension in the air, a sense that what was about to happen was far removed from the mundane rhythm of everyday justice. Homan listened intently as the case was discussed in technical details, but his mind was already turning to the damning material hidden in his folder. He recalled the countless hours spent gathering evidence. Sealed documents, confidential memos, and even video recordings that exposed illicit meetings between influential political figures and Judge Boasberg. These items painted a damning picture. A judge who manipulated verdicts, accepted bribes, and fostered behind-the-scenes alliances with government operatives who preferred to keep national security shrouded in secrecy. The murmurs in the room grew louder as Homan's concentration did not waver. Even among the polished legal professionals, there was an undercurrent of unease, as if they sensed that the perfect facade of justice was about to crumble. Homan's calm expression belied the fierce determination burning within him. He had witnessed too many innocent lives crushed under the weight of unjust rulings. He had seen the powerful safeguard their misdeeds behind layers of red tape and self-righteous rhetoric. Today, his purpose was singular, to confront that abuse of power head-on. It was not long before subtle hints of a hidden conspiracy began to flicker in the back of Homan's mind. A sidelong glance from a uniformed court clerk, a discreet nod exchanged between two attorneys in the gallery, even the barely perceptible tightening of Boasberg's jaw when a particular phrase was uttered, all contributed to a growing feeling that the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Homan had prepared for this. He knew that once he unfolded his evidence, the reaction would be swift and possibly explosive. As the hearing proceeded and the judge droned on in legal jargon, Tom Homan rose quietly from his seat. With a deliberate and measured stride, he moved to the center of the courtroom. Every eye was now fixed on him. The room seemed to hold its breath as he slowly raised his hand and, in a voice that was both calm and resolute, announced, "Your Honor, I have documents to submit, documents that reveal a grave abuse of power by this very bench." At that moment, the time-worn order of the courtroom cracked open, and the seeds of revolution against the entrenched system were sown. Homan opened his folder and began to present the evidence. Photographs, annotated papers, and short video clips spilled onto the courtroom's digital projector, each piece meticulously compiled to expose Judge Boasberg's misdemeanors. Instances of bribery, evidence of covert political maneuvering, and records that revealed manipulative interference in national security cases. The impact was immediate. A shocked silence replaced the routine formality, and whispers of disbelief and outrage echo through the chamber. Even the polished veneer of Boasberg's confident demeanor wavered as he glanced at the incriminating materials being displayed. As the damning evidence illuminated the hidden corridors of corruption, the stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge not only the authority of a single judge, but also the entire system that had long shielded such abuses. In that electrified moment, an invisible line was drawn between those determined to uphold justice and those who had manipulated it for their own gain. Tom Homan, armed with truth and unwavering resolve, had taken the first step, a step that promised to ignite a battle between truth and power and to resonate across the nation. A heavy, expectant silence had settled over the courtroom as Tom Homan took a deliberate breath, his eyes scanning the faces of everyone present, from the sharply dressed attorneys to the subdued clerks, as well as the stoic, probing gaze of Judge Boasberg. The echo of his earlier announcement still reverberated in the hall. Now, with his folder firmly in hand and his steady gaze fixed on the judge's bench, Homan began to speak in a voice that resonated with years of disillusionment and uncompromising resolve. "Members of this court, esteemed colleagues, and all who have gathered here today," Homan declared, his tone measured yet laden with intensity. "I stand before you not merely as a former director of ICE, but as a man who has borne witness to the erosion of our sacred institutions. We are all here to seek justice. Yet today I expose a truth that demands we reconsider the very foundations of our judicial system." His words cut through the quiet, each syllable echoing with a weight that momentarily seemed to suspend time. With a decisive motion, Homan slowly opened his nondescript folder and projected its contents onto the digital display mounted at the front of the courtroom. The screen flickered to life with a series of meticulously organized documents. Scanned memos, time-stamped emails, annotated photographs, and video clips that captured clandestine meetings in shadowy back rooms. "What you are about to see," he continued, "are irrefutable records that place Judge James Boasberg at the center of a vile network of corruption and abuse of power." Homan paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. He then turned his attention to a particularly damning set of documents. A series of bank statements that detailed suspicious transfers and accounts clearly linked to the judge's name. "These documents," he said, pointing to the evidence on the screen, "reveal transactions that cannot be explained by legitimate judicial income. They suggest the acceptance of bribes and favors from influential political figures, individuals who, instead of being held accountable, use their clout to subvert justice." A ripple of murmurs ran through the courtroom, some voices low and uncertain, others rising in shock. "Furthermore," Homan continued, his voice growing even more resolute, "I present to you a series of recorded conversations, video evidence that underscores the manipulation of verdicts and the deliberate rigging of cases involving matters of national security. Judge Boasberg's conduct in these cases shows a pattern of deliberate prejudice, where decisions are driven not by the rule of law, but by political expediency and self-interest." He gestured at a brief video clip playing on the screen, grainy images of a conversation between Boasberg and an unnamed political operative, their voices overlapping in an exchange that hinted at secret deals and the silencing of dissent. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense as Homan pressed on. His usually measured cadence now carried the full force of his disillusionment and righteousness. "We must ask ourselves," he urged, "what becomes of justice when those entrusted to uphold it allow personal ambition and corrupt influences to dictate outcomes? How can we stand idle when the scales of justice are so hopelessly imbalanced by the machinations of power?" His eyes locked with several members of the jury and even fell on the judge himself, whose confident veneer had begun to show subtle cracks. Homans then reached for another set of documents. This time, a dossier containing annotated court records and internal communications that revealed attempts to cover up evidence of judicial misconduct. "My investigation has uncovered not only the abuse of power, but also a concerted effort within this system to conceal these transgressions," he stated. "What you see here is an active campaign of obfuscation. Emails between court clerks and high-ranking officials, the very people who should stand as bastions of impartiality, discuss strategies to bury inconvenient evidence. It is a scaffold built to prop up the corrupted decisions that have cost countless citizens their rights and freedoms." As Homan spoke, the tension was palpable. His words were not just a recounting of files and figures. They were a passionate indictment of a system that had grown complacent and complicit. "I am not here merely as a whistleblower," he clarified, his voice firm and unwavering, "but as a messenger of accountability. I stand for the truth, for the victims of these unjust verdicts, and for every citizen who believes that the law should be blind to influence and corruption. I claim that this court, and indeed this nation, deserves far better than the hideous tapestry of deceit woven right under our noses." A long pause followed as his words hung in the air like a challenge. Homan's declaration was not only an exposé of specific misdeeds. He was hinting at an even larger conspiracy, a systematic rot within the judicial establishment that had allowed, and even encouraged, such abuses to flourish unchecked. "I must also tell you," he lowered his voice slightly to draw all ears closer, "that there are forces within even our revered institutions who have been warning about these very practices. Warnings that were ignored, dismissed, and, in some cases, deliberately suppressed. Today's revelations are merely the tip of the iceberg. I intend to shed light on a conspiracy that runs deep, one that implicates not only Judge Boasberg, but extends into corridors of power in the very agencies charged with safeguarding our nation." An audible shiver passed through the crowd. Every eye was now riveted on Homans, and even those who had once regarded him with polite disinterest could no longer hide their astonishment. His voice resonated not with bitterness alone, but with a fierce hope that his actions might spark the long-overdue reckoning with corruption. "I understand the full implications of what I am about to unveil," he said solemnly, "and I know that by taking this stand, I am making powerful enemies. But I assure you, the truth must come to light, and the people demand accountability." At that moment, the courtroom felt as if it were on the verge of transformation. The piercing clarity of Homan's arguments and the overwhelming evidence he had presented left little room for denials. Even Judge Boasberg, who had maintained a facade of impunity until now, could not hide a flash of uncertainty in his eyes. The foundation of his authority was shaking, and Homan's words had ignited a spark that would soon set off a conflagration of public outrage and institutional reform. With one last, piercing look that conveyed both the weight of responsibility and the promise of change, Homans concluded his address. "Today," he declared, "marks the beginning of a long-awaited reckoning. I call upon every one of you, citizens, officials, and of this very court, to stand with truth against corruption. Let us reclaim our justice, for in doing so, we reclaim our soul as a nation." As his voice faded, the silence in the courtroom transformed into a sound like distant thunder, a murmur of disbelief, hope, and the uncertain promise of a revolution. The seeds of dissent had been sown, and though the battle for accountability was just beginning, Homan's words had kindled a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The courtroom's collective breath seemed to catch in suspended disbelief as Tom Homan advanced further into his damning exposé. With an unwavering steadiness, he reached back into the folder and slowly revealed a thick set of documents that had been huddled between other papers by design. On the oversized projector screen behind him, the images flickered into view, documents annotated with red ink, digital timestamps, cryptic emails, and bank records that traced a trail of illicit financial transactions directly to Judge James Boasberg's accounts. Homan's voice, both calm and resolute, carried the weight of every injustice he had witnessed over the years. "This next set of evidence," he declared, "proves that the transactions we are discussing here are not random. They are part of a calculated network of corruption." He pointed to a series of printed bank statements that clearly showed large sums of money transferred on dates that coincided with the judge's rulings in several high-stakes national security cases. Each transfer was marked with obscure references that, upon close scrutiny, revealed coded messages referencing special arrangements and discrete commissions. As the numbers and figures scrolled slowly onto the projector, a low murmur began to ripple through the courtroom. The hushed commentary grew more insistent as a page flipped to reveal a series of emails exchanged between Judge Boasberg and a shadowy political operative known only by an alias. In these emails, one could discern a web of backdoor negotiations, discussions of case outcomes, assurances of silence, and veiled mentions of monetary incentives. The operative's tone was casual but unambiguously corrupt, and Boasberg's responses, peppered with uncharacteristic flattery and feigned reluctance, confirmed his complicity. At this moment, Homan's paused to let the resounding implications sink in. His steady gaze swept over the faces in the courtroom. The symphony of shock, denial, and growing outrage was visible in every set of eyes. Even the normally impassive court clerks and stoic lawyers exchanged troubled glances, and a few whispered comments could be faintly heard. In stark contrast, Judge Boasberg's confident facade quivered. For the first time in his long career, the man who had always exuded an aura of unassailable authority looked visibly shaken. "Your Honor," Homan continued, his tone now edged with determination, "I am about to show you something even more damning." He reached for a small digital recorder that had been discreetly integrated into his folder and played a short video clip. Grainy and unpolished as it might have been, the clip depicted a private meeting in a dimly lit office. There, in hushed tones and with furtive glances over shoulders, Judge Boasberg was seen conversing with a known political fixer. The conversation was laced with an undercurrent of menace and mutual understanding, a pact clearly designed to rig certain cases and ensure that inconvenient truths would remain buried. The courtroom erupted in a tense silence that bordered on chaos. Some attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others frowned deeply, struggling to reconcile the man they had once revered with the image of a corrupt official on live evidence. A few members of the press, already poised with cameras and notepads, began scribbling furiously, their faces registering the gravity of the revelation. One could almost feel the scales of justice teetering precariously, as if the very fabric of the institution was being torn apart by the undeniable truths laid bare by Homans. Across the room, Judge Boasberg attempted to regain control. His lips twitched into a tight smile, but it was an expression of suppressed panic rather than authority. He pounded his gavel once, twice, an appeal to order, but his voice, when he finally spoke, came out as a strained protest. "This evidence," he stammered, "is not admissible. These are hearsay and manipulated records." His objection, however, was drowned out by the mounting murmurs of disbelief and the palpable tension that now electrified every corner of the courtroom. At that moment, the atmosphere shifted from incredulity to sheer apprehension. Several lawyers began to question not just the integrity of the judge but the entire system that had allowed such corruption to flourish in plain sight. The outcry was mounting. A couple of legal aides whispered that these documents should be immediately forwarded to external oversight bodies for independent review. The tension became almost tangible, a living entity that invaded the space between every whispered comment and trembling gaze. Homans, undeterred by the resistance, pressed on. "I have meticulously verified these documents, cross-checking every detail with financial experts and forensic analysts. Every piece of evidence here clearly indicates that Judge Boasberg's decisions have been manipulated for personal gain. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a systematic abuse of power." The resolute timbre of his words resonated with the gathered masses, stirring an awakening of justice and the cry for accountability. Even as stops and starts in his pacing betrayed the gravity of the situation, Homan's tone grew more impassioned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he asserted, "today you are witnessing the unmasking of a truth that should not have been hidden in the shadows. I urge this court to pause, reflect, and act in the interests of justice. For the sake of every citizen whose life has been affected by these unjust decisions, we must dismantle this web of collusion, this network of unchecked power that has undermined our legal system." The sheer force of Homan's rhetoric had turned the atmosphere from one of controlled courtroom decorum into a charged arena of rebellion against injustice. The evidence was all there, transmitted with a clarity that left no room for simple denial. With each piece of damning proof laid bare, the once unassailable stature of Judge Boasberg began to crumble under the weight of truth. The tension in the room was no longer just a reaction. It was a battle cry for justice from those who had long suffered in silence. Even now, as the final images of the incriminating video faded from the screen, a murmur of anticipation lingered. What would be the next move of this once-feared judge? And how would the institution of justice respond when its very foundations were exposed? In that fraught moment, the fate of the courtroom, and perhaps of the nation's trust in its systems of power, hung precariously in the balance. A deafening silence blanketed the courtroom as the damning evidence continued to pulse on the projector screen. In the midst of the mounting chaos, Judge James Boasberg, once the epitome of unchallenged authority, began a desperate attempt to seize back control. His hand slapped down on the gavel with more force than usual, as if the sound might shatter the onslaught of revelations. For a moment, his eyes flickered with a steely glint, a signal to reassert his command, but the expression rapidly morphed into one of palpable fear. The seasoned judge, known for his unshakable confidence, now appeared visibly unsettled, his features drawn tight in a mask of anxiety. "Order in the court," Boasberg bellowed. His voice strained as he tried to rise above the murmurs and scattered exclamations that rippled through the gallery. Yet, beneath the veneer of authority, a quiver betrayed his inner turmoil. His shaking hands attempted to signal the bailiff to remove the rogue evidence from the docket, but the documents and videos had already embedded themselves within the collective conscience of everyone present. The judge's protestations, fraught with legal jargon and hyperbolic demands for order, rang hollow, overwhelmed by the incontrovertible facts displayed just moments before. As Boasberg moved toward the bench, his measured steps betrayed an uncharacteristic urgency. He dismissed objections with rapid-fire motions and stern looks, darting his eyes around the room as if searching for an ally among his legal aides. This is nothing but a circus," he rasped, his voice cracking under the strain of mounting pressure. "These materials, they're clearly manipulated, fabricated. I have not, and do not, sanctioned any such revelations." His words struggled to maintain their force, but the timbre of his tone was unmistakably that of a man losing his grip on a situation spiraling beyond his control. Every gesture he made was scrutinized by the assembly. The seasoned attorneys from across the room leaned in, whispering to one another, their faces a study in disbelief as they observed their once commanding judge visibly shrink back from his own declarations. Even the court clerks, who had in the past dutifully recorded his every word, exchanged uneasy glances as Boasberg tried in vain to orchestrate the chaos swirling around him. In a particularly dramatic moment, Judge Boasberg slammed his fist onto the desk, scattering pens and papers. "I will not have this courtroom turned into a platform for political vendettas," he roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. However, the force in his outburst was tempered by a quavering undertone that betrayed the real emotion underneath: fear. It was the kind of fear that creeps into one's marrow when the foundations of power begin to crumble, when the very institutions that once conferred authority now seem fragile and exposed. A few members of the jury, initially seated with expressions of stoic detachment, now shifted in their seats. Their eyes spoke volumes as they silently absorbed the unfolding spectacle. The once imposing figure of Judge Boasberg now appeared diminished, his authority undermined not merely by the evidence, but by his own inability to convincingly refute the revelations. Among the spectators, Whispers turned to startled murmurs of "he's scared," and "this isn't the judge we thought we knew." While even some of the more cynical legal professionals could not hide their surprise at the unmistakable signs of panic. It wasn't only the courtroom's occupants who sensed the shift. Outside, through the tall, arched windows, reporters and onlookers who had gathered in the courthouse steps began to murmur more loudly. Their cameras and microphones had captured the moment distinctly. A venerable judge visibly battling his own inner demons as he attempted to suppress evidence that clearly implicated him in a web of corruption. Social media buzzed with tentative hashtags and live updates, and news tickers began flashing preliminary reports of a possible miscarriage of justice unfolding right before the eyes of law-abiding citizens. Judge Boasberg attempted a further tactical maneuver, a flurry of objections and calls for an immediate recess so that the board could be examined for authenticity. "I demand that these documents be removed and that a recess be called immediately," he insisted, voice rising once more. But his words, mired in bureaucratic platitudes, were drowned out by the uproar of dissent echoing from the gallery. Even his gavel, once a symbol of his unchallenged command, now felt impotent in the face of mounting evidence and the collective will of those who had gathered in pursuit of truth. In the chaos of the unfolding moment, Homan's maintained his unyielding stance. Seated at the front, his eyes met Boasberg's, a silent collision of defiance and desperation. The judge's face, now flushed with a mix of anger and apprehension, betrayed a rare vulnerability. Behind that stern mask, the weight of his misdeeds and the creeping realization of inevitable accountability were written in every furrow and twitch. As Boasberg's frantic attempts to stop the proceedings grew increasingly desperate, the spectators realized that his protestations were not those of a man simply defending his honor. They were the feeble last gasps of an institution unwilling to face its own decay. Among the press corps, scribes noted every hesitancy, every quiver in his voice, interpreting them as evidence of a man caught in the grip of impending downfall. "He is terrified," one reporter later remarked in a live broadcast, the sentiment capturing the collective shock of the populace. The judge's attempts at reasserting control only served to highlight the profound fissures within the legal system. His frantic motions, the repeated clattering of his gavel, and his desperate outbursts all combined to expose an underlying truth: that authority, when based solely on reputation and force, was no match for the relentless march of truth. His voice, once the clarion call of justice, now trembled under the scrutiny of the very people he was meant to serve. A stark reminder that no one, regardless of title, was above accountability. By now, a sense of inevitability permeated the courtroom. The damning evidence, the verbal disintegration of Judge Boasberg's once impeccable composure, and the palpable fear reflected in his eyes had all converged to form an unmistakable narrative. The court, an institution long thought impregnable by tradition and power, stood at the precipice of an irrevocable transformation. The crowd, aware of the seismic shift taking place, could feel that the wheels of justice were turning in a new direction. A direction that promised to expose corruption at its very core and restore faith in a system long tainted by collusion and fear. In that moment of strident vulnerability, Judge Boasberg's futile struggles served as a mirror to every citizen in the room, a reflection of the deep-seated rot that had festered in the corridors of power. The courtroom, now heavy with the scent of looming reform, bore witness to a defining juncture in the battle between power and truth. And as every shudder of fear on the judge's face was recorded not just by cameras but by the hearts of those present, the seeds of a broader revolution were sown. The truth was undeniable, and the reckoning was only just beginning. In the charged atmosphere of the courtroom, still reeling from Tom Homan's damning exposé, an uneasy murmur of disbelief had begun to spread among the assembled spectators, attorneys, and court officials. The damning evidence projected behind Homan's continued to cast its long shadow over the proceedings, and as Judge Boasberg stammered his desperate objections, an almost imperceptible shift in the room's tension signaled that the situation was about to transcend the confines of mere courtroom drama. Suddenly, the heavy, polished oak doors at the far end of the courtroom burst open with a resounding crash. The sound reverberated off the stone walls and sent a jolt of panic rippling through the gathered crowd. A squad of FBI agents, clad in dark suits with stern expressions and an unmistakable aura of authority, stormed into the chamber. Their synchronized and deliberate movements left no doubt. They were here on official business, and by the looks on their faces and the resolute glint in their eyes, they were prepared to enforce the law, regardless of the implications. FBI, stand down or comply, the lead agent barked, his voice amplified by a portable PA system as he advanced toward Judge Boasberg's bench. The judge, who moments earlier had attempted in vain to command respect and control, now looked wholly disoriented. His face, previously flushed with anger and masked panic, rapidly drained of color as the agents closed in. In a moment that seemed to stretch on in surreal slow motion, one of the agents firmly gripped Boasberg by the arm and stated, "Judge Boasberg, you are under arrest for corruption, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice." The raucous sound of shuffling feet and hurried whispers merged with the pounding of hearts as the room erupted into chaos. Court officials scrambled to secure records and summon additional security, while lawyers and spectators alike exchanged incredulous glances. Some of the less composed individuals began to shout, their voices mingling shock with indignation, while others pressed closer to their phones, determined to capture every moment on camera. Tom Homan, standing at the forefront of the unfolding spectacle, watched with a steady gaze that belied the gravity of what had just transpired. For him, this was not a moment of triumph for any individual. It was a long overdue reckoning. As he tucked his folder securely under his arm, his mind churned with the realization that the truth, once suppressed by powerful interests, was now blazing a trail through the very heart of an institution many considered sacred. Homan's expression was one of solemn vindication. He had risked everything to expose a deep-seated rot, and now, the collapse of a corrupt regime was taking shape before his eyes. Amid the uproar, Judge Boasberg attempted one last outburst, his voice faltering as he struggled to muster a semblance of authority. "This is a travesty. This evidence is inadmissible," he shouted, but his words barely registered above the determined shouts of the agents. One of the FBI officers, his face set in unwavering determination, calmly countered, "Your Honor, save your arguments for the defense. We have moved far beyond that point. You will follow us now." As the judge was guided, almost forcibly, toward the exit, the agents meticulously combed through the courtroom, ensuring that no piece of evidence was compromised. Every step, every gesture was captured by the ever-present lens of cameras, from both the official security feed and the flashbulbs of news reporters now converging upon the scene. The arrest of Judge Boasberg ignited an explosive reaction outside the courtroom as well. Within minutes, news vans began to swarm the courthouse steps, and live broadcasts took to social media. Headlines began to form even as the arrest was still unfolding. Corrupt judge taken down in stunning FBI raid, and courtroom chaos. The day justice fought back. Public sentiment, already simmering with frustration over decades of unchecked corruption, now found a rallying cry in the face of such dramatic accountability. Inside, as the FBI meticulously secured the area and escorted Boasberg out, the witnesses in the courtroom were left to grapple with their own conflicted emotions. Many realized that the iconic symbol of judicial authority was now crumbling under the force of undeniable evidence and institutional intervention. For a few, tears of relief mingled with disbelief. For others, a quiet fury burned as they recognized that this arrest was merely the beginning. Murmurs of "finally, justice," and "this isn't the end, there's much more to uncover," began to echo through the crowd. Yet, amid the chaos and shifting allegiances, a disquieting undercurrent began to emerge. As the agents escorted the judge out of the courtroom, one of them glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting further complications. The controlled tumult hinted that the labyrinth of corruption might extend even deeper, into the very institutions that were meant to uphold the law. In that charged moment, as the judge's words of protest dwindled to a faint echo and the courtroom gradually settled into a stunned stillness, Tom Homan realized with a cold certainty that his battle for truth was not over. The arrest of Judge Boasberg was not a conclusive victory but rather a spark that could ignite a wildfire of scrutiny, challenging the entire system of power from within. The reverberations of this pivotal moment that afternoon started to spread beyond the confines of the courtroom. Whispers of hope and outrage emerged in hushed conversations in coffee shops, university lecture halls, and even on the streets of the city. For many, Homan's bold stand and the dramatic intervention of the FBI signified the potential for a new era of transparency and reform. Yet, a lingering tension persisted in the air, a sense that powerful forces were still at work, ready to strike back and conceal further truths lurking in the shadows. As the courtroom doors finally closed behind the departing FBI agents and the arrested judge was led away, a profound silence settled over the once bustling hall. The moment had been etched into the collective memory of everyone present. A moment that marked not only the downfall of one corrupt official, but the beginning of something far more significant. In that silence, Tom Homan's resolve hardened further. He knew the fight for justice had only just begun, and that unearthing the full scope of a system teeming with secrets would require even greater courage and unwavering persistence. As the echo of chaos faded from the courtroom corridors, Tom Homan knew that the exposure of Judge Boasberg's corruption was merely the opening salvo in a battle that ran much deeper than anyone had dared assume. In the aftermath of the dramatic arrest, while reporters swarmed the courthouse and the public raged with a mix of indignation and cautious hope, Homan retreated to a modest safe house to review the flood of additional information that had begun to emerge from unexpected quarters. Late one chilly evening, as a bitter autumn wind rattled against the windows, Homan discovered an encrypted email tucked away in a secure inbox he had long maintained for sensitive communications. The message was brief and anonymous. A single line that sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. There is more to Boasberg's story than meets the eye. Look within the ranks. The mole has spoken. The cryptic note hinted at a revelation that chilled him to his core. Could it be that within the very agency now enforcing the law, someone was secretly undermining justice? Homan's mind raced as he recalled subtle, almost imperceptible, anomalies in the internal communications he had intercepted during his relentless pursuit of evidence. Whispers of reluctance, coded memos, and discreet meetings among certain FBI agents now suggested that the corruption was not circumscribed solely to the judge's secluded sphere. Determined to follow this treacherous lead, Homan began to piece together a complex puzzle late into the night. He pored over digital logs, scrutinized internal memos, and cross-referenced timestamps with public court records. A pattern emerged. A series of anomalous alerts and silent warnings circulated among a small group of operatives within the FBI. According to the fragments he compiled, one high-ranking agent had, over several months, clandestinely communicated sensitive reports to an unknown source. Rather than acting against Boasberg, this insider had been issuing cryptic advisories that seemed designed to shield the corrupt judge from impending investigations. The insider's actions, though covertly documented, now pointed to the existence of a mole, a rogue element within the bureau whose identity was shrouded in as much mystery as the deals it had helped conceal. Facing the gravity of this new discovery, Homan scheduled a discreet meeting with a trusted source, a former FBI forensic analyst now working as a private investigator, known only by the pseudonym Raven. In a drab, run-down diner on the outskirts of the city, away from the prying eyes of surveillance, Raven recounted the chilling details. In palpable whispers over steaming mugs of weak coffee, the informant revealed that during his tenure, he had observed irregularities in case files and inexplicable delays in internal audits whenever Judge Boasberg's cases were under review. I even received a warning, Raven confided, voice low and trembling with suppressed anxiety. A veiled threat from someone who made it clear that speaking out would cost me dearly. They referred to me as a nuisance, someone who needed to be silenced. Raven's testimony confirmed Homan's worst suspicions. The corruption network extended far beyond Boasberg's courtroom antics and, disturbingly, permeated the ranks of the FBI. The mysterious insider, whom Raven insisted was codenamed the Sentinel, had been strategically passing on intelligence to Boasberg, ensuring that any attempts to probe the judge's conduct were preemptively stifled. The revelation was shattering. Not only was a prominent judge compromised, but the very institution meant to uphold national security and administer impartial justice was being compromised from within. Armed with this damning intelligence, Homans expanded his investigation. Over the ensuing days, he worked methodically, securing further documents from whistleblower networks, coordinating with independent forensic experts, and reaching out to journalists with a proven record of exposing government malfeasance. Every new piece of evidence underscored a disturbing narrative. Inside the FBI, a small cadre of operatives, led by the Sentinel, had been operating a parallel network of subterfuge designed to protect powerful figures. This network not only ensured that Judge Boasberg's illicit activities remained intact, but also funneled sensitive information to higher-ups with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Homans felt the weight of the revelation. He scribbled notes late into the night, piecing together timelines, forging connections between covert email chains, and drawing intricate diagrams linking the corrupted judge to shadowy political figures, and now to the enigmatic mole within the FBI. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that the struggle for transparency and accountability had only just begun. His gut told him that taking on this dual-layered corruption would put him in the crosshairs of forces far more dangerous than he had ever encountered. The stakes were now unbelievably high. As Homans prepared a report that would be shared with an independent oversight committee, he sensed a chilling urgency in every decision he made. Every encrypted message he received, every hushed tip from a frightened official, further peeled away the facade of a once-respected agency. His investigation was evolving from a personal crusade into a movement, a rallying point for truth-seekers who could no longer accept that the very guardians of justice might be compromised from the inside. Yet, with each step that Homans took toward unveiling this covert conspiracy, the risks intensified. Late one night, while reviewing a particularly damning set of internal memos, he noticed an unfamiliar number flash on his secure communication device. A number that had not appeared before and which, ominously, bore the guise of a routine system alert. His heart pounded as he answered, careful to speak in a hushed tone. The voice on the other end was curt, barely more than a whisper, and delivered a stark message: "Stop digging, or you'll be next." The threat, though muted in its phrasing, was crystal clear in its intent. The game had changed, and Homans now knew he was up against adversaries willing to silence him by any means necessary. In that moment, the scope of his mission crystallized before him. What had begun as a bid for accountability had metamorphosed into a battle for the soul of the nation. The layers of deception were deeper than he'd imagined, and the very pillars of justice were trembling under the weight of unbridled corruption. Homans steeled himself against the encroaching darkness. Every piece of evidence, every anonymous tip, and every risk he took now was not only for the sake of vindicating a single judge or exposing a single mole. It was to rescue a system that had long been mired in deceit, to restore faith in a nation where the oppressed had finally reclaimed their right to be heard. As dawn broke over the city, painting the skyline in a somber palette of muted grays and hopeful oranges, Tom Homans emerged from the shadows of his safe house with a renewed determination. The next phase of his investigation was about to begin, and he knew that the fight against this insidious network, both in the corridors of the judiciary and within the walls of the FBI, would test him in ways he could scarcely imagine. But one truth burned unwaveringly within him. The pursuit of justice, however dangerous, was a cause worth every sacrifice. In the weeks that followed the tumultuous courtroom upheaval, a seismic shift began echoing throughout the nation. News of Judge Boasberg's arrest, and more startlingly, of the dual betrayal that emanated from within the FBI, had swept across every media outlet and ignited a spark of public indignation. Tom Homans, once relegated to the shadows as a disgraced former ICE director, had now emerged as the reluctant standard-bearer for justice. His name was emblazoned on headlines, his face a constant fixture on TV screens, and for the first time in decades, he was bodying a movement that demanded transparency, accountability, and reform. Yet, Homans knew that while the courtroom battle against corruption had reached a fever pitch, the war for the soul of the system was only beginning. On a brisk morning outside a renovated civic center, now repurposed as the venue for the city's grand public forum, hundreds of citizens gathered. They came to witness a historic press conference where bipartisan leaders, reform advocates, and brave whistleblowers assembled to chart a new course for justice in America. Illuminated by the glow of countless smartphones and backed by an atmosphere thick with expectation, Homans took the stage with measured confidence. His once-hidden folder of incriminating evidence had become a symbol of truth. Every document, every email, every recorded conversation had been scrutinized and validated by independent experts. The weight of that truth brought him to this moment of reckoning before an audience that spanned from disillusioned citizens to seasoned journalists hungry for accountability. In a voice that carried both the scars of past betrayals and the fervor of a visionary, Homans began his address. "Today," he announced, "we stand united against the corrosion of our institutions. What you have witnessed in that courtroom was not an isolated act of contrition. It is the tip of a much larger iceberg that has long plagued our system of justice." As he spoke, enormous screens behind him cycled through images of damning documents, intercepted recordings, and financial ledgers that traced a network of illicit dealings. These visuals were interspersed with footage of outraged citizens marching on government buildings, highlighting that the revival of truth was becoming a national outcry. Homans continued, recounting the painstaking process that had led him to uncover not only Judge Boasberg's malfeasance but also the existence of the Sentinel, the elusive insider within the FBI whose secret warnings had almost made all his work for nothing. "Our investigation," he explained, "has shown that corruption is not confined to a single judge or a handful of crooked officials. It is systemic. It permeates our judicial system and, distressingly, even the ranks of those sworn to protect it. But we have the power to change that." His words resonated amid the assembled crowd, a clarion call to all who had suffered quietly from injustice and abuse of authority. Over the next hour, the forum became a cauldron of ideas and emotions. High-ranking state officials stepped forward to pledge support for an independent oversight committee tasked with rooting out corruption within the judiciary and law enforcement. Reform-minded legislators outlined plans for sweeping changes, from greater transparency in judicial proceedings to new methods of holding public servants accountable. Activists and community leaders shared personal testimonies, detailing how abuse of power had harmed lives and undermined the public's trust. Every testimonial reinforced the conviction that the fight for justice would require a united front, one that melded grassroots passion with institutional change. Among the throng of voices clamoring for reform, Tom Homan's call for vigilance was clear and unwavering. "I stand before you not as a man who has triumphed over adversity, but as one who has seen the darkest corners of our system and recognizes that the struggle for truth is never truly over," Homans declared with quiet gravitas. "We must hold every player, no matter how high their stone towers or gilded titles, to the same standard. We must dismantle the networks of secrecy and fear that allow wrongdoers to thrive in the shadows." His message was simple yet powerful. Accountability is not a momentary fix. It must be an ever-watchful commitment by a vigilant citizenry. As the forum drew to a close, the atmosphere shifted from one of explosive indignation to a focused determination to enact lasting change. Protesters organized into committees, drafting proposals for legislative hearings, and establishing platforms for whistleblowers. The news media, once skeptical of Homan's revelations, now amplified his message, promising relentless coverage of every further twist in the unfolding saga. Homans was inundated with calls, from former colleagues, from civic organizations, and even from international bodies intrigued by the bold defiance against entrenched corruption. Facing the barrage of attention, Homans remained resolute. In a quiet moment away from the glare of cameras and the endless roars of applause, he reflected on the cost of his crusade. There were risks that loomed large, a promise from shadowy figures that the hunt for truth might turn lethal, and the daunting task of rebuilding trust in institutions that had, for too long, betrayed that trust. Yet, as he looked out over the sea of determined faces, he knew that his fight was not merely his own. It was the collective struggle of every citizen yearning for a system that honored transparency and justice over deception and privilege. In his final remarks at the forum, Homans declared, "This is not the end, but the beginning. The arrest of corrupt officials and the unveiling of hidden conspiracies are only the first steps. We must continue to peel back the layers of complicity until every thread of corruption is exposed. The truth will not be buried beneath lies. It will be the very foundation upon which our future is built. I urge you all to stand vigilant, to question authority, and to demand that our system be cleansed from within. His voice, fraught with both hope and solemn determination, reverberated in the hushed silence that followed, a silence heavy with the promise of change. As the crowd slowly dispersed, carrying with them the seeds of revolution and the vision of a reformed justice system, one thing was abundantly clear. Tom Homan's had become the face of a movement, a symbol of resilience in the face of systemic decay. In that pivotal moment, as the first light of a new era broke through the dark legacy of corruption, the nation understood that the battle had only begun. The fight for truth would be long and arduous, but in every protest sign, every fervent tweet, and every whispered conversation in coffee shops across America, there echoed a single, undeniable message. What you have just witnessed is not merely a story about a court and the truth. It is the beginning. The next video will reveal who controls things behind the scenes. Subscribe now so you won't miss the truth they want to hide.